Our gospel this morning comes from the Gospel of John, and Jesus is continuing his instructions to his disciples as he's spending his last few days with them here on earth. Because the loveless world, said Jesus, is a sightless world. If anyone loves me, he will carefully keep my word, and my Father will love him. We'll move right into the neighborhood. Not loving me means not keeping my words. The message you are hearing isn't mine. It's the message of the Father who sent me. I'm telling you these things while I'm still living with you. The friend, the Holy Spirit whom the Father will send at my request, will make everything plain to you. He will remind you of all the things I have told you. I am leaving you well and whole. That's my parting gift to you. Peace. I don't leave you the way you're used to being left, feeling abandoned and bereft. So don't be upset. Don't be distraught. You've heard me tell you I'm going away and I'm coming back. If you love me, you would be glad that I'm on my way to the Father, because the Father is the goal and purpose of my life. I've told you this ahead of time, before it happens, so that when it does happen, the confirmation will deepen your belief in me. I'll not be talking with you much more like this, because the chief of this godless world is about to attack. But don't worry. He has nothing on me, no claim on me. But so the world might know how thoroughly I love the Father, I am carrying out my Father's instructions right down to the last detail. Get up. Let's go. It's time to leave here. The Word of God for the people of God. May the Spirit add a blessing to our understanding of it.
They stood side by side, shoulder to shoulder, and answered the call. They moved forward, advancing the ideas that everyone was free. Everyone was created equal. Everyone has the right to pursue their own dreams. And that our nation was founded on those ideals. But not all of them came back. Some remained, never to go home, never to see their families. And some we lost this side of the field of battle. They were sons and daughters, brothers and sisters, fathers and mothers, greatly loved. They charged forward for honor, and peace, and freedom. We acknowledge the empty space where we want them to be. Together we pay sincere tribute to those who fought for us. Those we remember, those we love.
Yep. This weekend, of course, this Memorial Day weekend, we have a chance to remember loved ones lost in their service to their country. And even on the weekend, to remember loved ones we've lost at any time in our lives. As I was thinking about this weekend, one word kept coming to mind, and that word was sacrifice. And I thought, what is sacrifice? That's an interesting question. It might seem to be an easy question to answer, but sacrifice is different for different people. What you call sacrifice, I might not call a sacrifice. Or vice versa. Like, there are some crazy people who like to put a tent in a car, go out to the woods, put that tent up, build a campfire, and spend the night in the heat, the humidity, battling bugs and stuff, and call that vacation and enjoy it. To me, that'd be a giant sacrifice to give up my comfortable bed and air conditioning, right? That's not something I want to do. I think I camped one time. Then some people go camping, and they call it camping, but they live in a trailer that's air conditioned and probably nicer than a lot of the homes we live in, and they call that camping. So sacrifice is different things. Obviously, to give your life for something would be the ultimate sacrifice. So we can all agree that is a sacrifice. Once upon a time, a pig and a chicken were walking down a village street. They came upon a church sign which was advertising a bazaar and breakfast, which was going to be held in a few days. At the bottom of the sign, the menu was given. It read, ham and eggs will be served from 6:30 to 8 o'clock. The chicken turned to the pig and said, "See, we can contribute something to this work of the church." "Yes," said the pig, "but yours is only a contribution. Mine is a sacrifice." Sacrifice can be and does mean different things to different people. But when you think about sacrifice, how often do we actually do it? Most of the time, asking somebody or asking me to make a real sacrifice is like asking a cat to take a bath. Right? We spend a lot of our lives working so we don't have to sacrifice. We spend a lot of our time and energy making our lives so comfortable that we don't really have to sacrifice anything. But sacrifice is a very important part of our lives as Christians. We don't talk about it a lot. We may think about it some. We may even think that some of the things that we do are sacrifices. And there might be sacrifices that are made that we all do. Like I'll sacrifice once in a while and do the dishes or vacuum the carpet or, take some of my valuable TV watching time and help around the house. But we don't talk about it. There's a question I read in a book. I can't remember the name of the book. I think it's the book Not a Fan by Kyle Idleman. But a question that haunts me and even drives me, the question is, what have you sacrificed, truly sacrificed to follow Jesus? So think about that for a minute. What have you sacrificed to follow Jesus? I thought about that question, and I don't know if I had a good answer. When I first read the book, I had written in the margins that I moved to Minden to be pastor at a church. And I suppose at the time, moving from St. Paul, I thought, yes, I'll sacrifice. I'll go serve this podunk down in Iowa for a few years, and then I'll get my experience and move on to bigger, better things. It'll be a sacrifice. But looking back, it wasn't much of a sacrifice at all, right? We fell in love with the town. I serve a wonderful church and a wonderful community, and it's a place where we want to raise our kids and we have no desire to leave. So maybe at the time we thought it was a sacrifice, but looking back, not much of a sacrifice at all. So what have I done as a sacrifice to truly follow Jesus? In Romans, Paul says, "I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. That is your spiritual act of worship." So we're to offer ourselves as a sacrifice, not necessarily give our lives up, but to find ways that we can live and sacrifice for God. The Webster definition of sacrifice is the offer of something that is precious, that has value, that is important. It isn't a sacrifice unless it costs you something. There's a story about the Butterball Turkey Company, and they have their hotline around Thanksgiving about how to make their turkey and preparing it. They talk of one call where a woman called up to inquire about cooking a turkey that had been in her freezer for 23 years. The operator told her that it might be safe in the freezer. It had been kept below 0 degrees for the entire time. But the operator warned the woman that the turkey had lost all of its flavor and that it would be terrible. And she wouldn't really recommend eating it. So the caller replied, "Well, that's good. I'll just give it to the church." A sacrifice isn't a sacrifice unless it costs you something. As I was writing and thinking of these examples of sacrifice, I thought about if there's a local food drive. The Boy Scouts come around and ask you for food for the food pantry. I thought about my house, right? Quick, I usually run to the cabinet, grab some vegetables, and give it to the Boy Scouts. Right, because if I was going shopping for food, I would need the first thing I look for is vegetables. If we're thinking about it, and we have a little more time, there might be a can of pasta sauce. Maybe if we're really lucky, we'll throw some noodles in there. Maybe some canned fruit. But why don't we open up our cupboard, get a box, and say, here's some flour, here's some sugar, here's some brown sugar, here's some crackers, some granola bars, some cereal, some mac and cheese, some chips. Why is that not set out on the porch? Because I need them. I use those. I eat those foods. That can of green beans, I'm not going to miss that. Right? That can of peas, I'm not going to miss that. That jar of fruit, probably not going to miss that. But those chips and that mac and cheese and that cereal, I'm going to eat that tomorrow. It's an example of we can give that can and say it's a sacrifice, but it's not really a sacrifice. And we do that all the time. I do that all the time. When I am called to give something, I find something I can give and I'll feel good about it, but it didn't really cost me anything. Probably not. Our culture teaches us, and we're guilty of it, I'm guilty of it, that it's about me, right? Avoid sacrifice and pain as much as you can. Better jobs, better money, more fun, more toys. And these things are all fine. But it's not what it's all about, these things. That's not what life is all about. A quote from a sermon I read got me thinking. I had never heard it before. I don't know if the pastor who wrote this sermon, or the sermon that I got this idea from, actually had this quote, or if he got it from somewhere else. So just know I didn't come up with it. But I loved it, and I had never thought of it this way before. God measures our giving not on how much we give, but on how much we have left. That's with anything. Money, time, energy. I thought, whoa, I had never thought of that. There's a story in the Gospel of Luke. It's also in the Gospel of Matthew. The story of the rich widow, or not, the poor widow. And she gave her 2 mites to the treasury, and she just says, you see how she gave out of her poverty, and she put all she had to live on. The story reads as Jesus looked up, he saw the rich putting their gifts into the treasury. He also saw a poor widow put in 2 very small copper coins. I tell you the truth, he said, this poor woman has put in more than all the others. All these people gave their gifts out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, put in all she had to live on. Giving is based on how much we have left. I thought, as making an act of sacrifice, I would preach here until noon. But that just be stupidity, right? Sacrifice for the sake of sacrifice is nothing. Sacrifice needs to have a point. It needs to be meaningful. It needs to accomplish something. The first part of the story, it says, Jesus saw. He looked up and saw. He sees everything that we do. He's never too busy to notice your sacrifice or notice your unwillingness to sacrifice. Jesus sees. He's never too busy to notice the little things that you do. A lot of times we get frustrated because we'll do something, we'll make a sacrifice, we'll do something, we don't get the thank you or the recognition or the accolades that we think we deserve. And sometimes we start to feel resentful. Oh, they don't really appreciate what I've done. And I can remember when I start to feel like that. I usually have a smart wife or a smart mentor or a smart spiritual guide that would say, hey, dummy, you're not doing it for yourself, right? No, I'm not doing it for myself. I'm doing it for God. And it should be enough to know that God sees what we have done and He notices. Jesus notices. Jesus has that famous passage when He says, do what you've done in secret and keep it in secret and God will reward you. That is interesting. When we start to feel resentful, do we do it because we want the accolades, we want to be known for what we've done, we want to be recognized? Remember that we don't do it for ourselves. Our motivation shouldn't be to see how many likes we can get on our page or how many thank yous we can get in the mail. It should be because we want to serve God in that way. The story about the widow and giving her the 2 copper coins is one of the last incidents in Jesus' public ministry before He would be arrested and sacrificing Himself. It's interesting that the Gospel of Luke would record it this way. Jesus could be doing all kinds of things before He's arrested and is getting ready to leave the earth. He could be teaching, He could be casting out demons, He could be healing, He could be spending time with family. But He took time to recognize this poor widow's gifts. And that tells us that He always recognizes and cares about our sacrifices or lack of sacrifices. He knows that time you put the extra dollar in, or you spent the extra couple hours doing this, or you took time out to help this person or that person. Jesus always recognizes and knows that. And he cares. He cares more about your response to the call. And he cares deeply about your sacrifice or your lack of sacrifice. If you look at the giving of that story, this lady was extremely poor. She was so poor, and she was a widow, meaning at that time she had no source of income. In those days, she would have been considered the bottom of the barrel. Right? She had really no way. There was no Social Security, there was no Medicare, there was no welfare, there were no women's shelters that she could stay. She was the lowest rung on the ladder. She may not even have been on the ladder when it came to wealth. And she gave 2 mites, they call it. 2 copper coins, what they say it was about worth of a 16th of a penny, is what they would have given. Think of the excuses she had not to give. And I know this example is about money, but when we talk about sacrifices, it's bigger than just money. Time, energy, passion. Think of the excuse she had not to give, right? Literally, it could be, I won't eat now. That might have been my last payment towards anything. Probably a 16th of a penny back then didn't go, or an 1/8 of a penny back then didn't go much further than it does now today. But think of all the great excuses. And think about if you're counting that offering and you see that giving versus what the other people are putting in, the way we would measure it and say, look, they gave 100 times what she gave, so their sacrifice or their giving was so much better than this person that gave an 1/8 of a penny. But if we measure giving by what we have left, she maybe had literally nothing left. And those that gave so much more had a lot left, or they didn't even notice that gift. So it's not hard if you look at it that way to see who gave the bigger sacrifice. But she had the built-in excuse. I need that to buy food for my kids, if she had kids. I need that to buy food for myself. I need that towards my house payment, my car payment. Right? I'm tired. I'm hungry. I'm too full. I'm broke. I'm bored. I'm not smart enough. I'm too smart. I'm not good enough. I'm too good to do that. I'm too young. I'm too short. I'm too old. I'm too tall. I'm too busy. I'm too tired. I'm buried in bills. I'm working too much. I don't have a job. I'm not ready. I'm overqualified. I can't speak well enough. I'm too far from there to help. I'm too close, or I'm too scared. What do all these excuses have in common? They don't work with God. Because we use those excuses, we miss out on the privilege of sacrificing for God. God wants our sacrifices, not our excuses. In spite of the many excuses, probably valid excuses she could have offered, the widow still gave. 2 wealthy Christians, a lawyer and a merchant, joined a party that was going around the world. Their pastor asked them to take pictures of anything which they thought unusual. In Korea, as they were traveling, they saw in a field a boy pulling a crude plow, while an old man held his hands on the handles. The lawyer was amused and took a picture. Commenting to the guide, he said, "That's an unusual sight. I suppose they are very poor." "Yes," came the answer, "they are poor. That is the family of Chai Nao. When the church was being built in this area, they were excited to give something to help it along, but they had no money. So they gave them the only ox that they had. They sold the only ox they had and gave that money to the church. This spring they are taking turns pulling the plow themselves." The lawyer said thoughtfully, "I'll bet that must have been a real sacrifice." The guide responded, "They didn't call it that. They thought it was fortunate they had an ox to sell." In spite of their poverty, in spite of the poor widow She held nothing back. She gave it all that she had to live on. God measures our giving not on how much we give, but on how much we have left. To offer something like that is a sacrifice. To offer something that is precious, that has value, that is important. She chose to be the pig and to sacrifice instead of the chicken and simply contribute. So as we spend this weekend with family or friends, or we enjoy the day off tomorrow, let's remember the sacrifice that was made so we could enjoy that freedom. Let us take time out of the day to thank God that we had people willing to do that for us. And then let's also think about what sacrifice is God calling on you. God has a call for each one of our lives. A call to give of time, of talents, of energy, of money. How is God asking you to sacrifice? If God didn't call us to sacrifice beyond ourselves, then nothing great would ever be achieved for God. You sacrifice for what you care about. You can always measure how much someone cares about something by how much they're willing to sacrifice for it. Jesus cared for us enough to sacrifice his own life for us. So what sacrifice are we willing to make for a God that loves us that much?